Administrative Management, where he is the co-chair of the Legislative Liaison Committee. He's an active member of his church and the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship International. He enjoys spending time with his family, traveling, politics, and volunteering at local citizen center. Where's the best place you ever went? Where do you want to go back to, Marquis?
Barcelona.
Oh, I've heard that as well. Okay, let's welcome Marquis de Jesus.
Good morning. Columbus, Georgia. Columbus, Georgia. Muscogee County Democratic Party. I said Muscogee County Democratic in 2020 and every year moving forward. I first want to thank the Muscogee County Democratic Party for putting this event together. And for all of you all who came out to hear your candidates for the United States Senate. I'm sure that all of us can agree that David Perdue needs to go home. So I'm excited to be here with my fellow Democratic colleagues, and I'm excited to be a part of this movement that we have in 2020 to not just unseat David Perdue, but every single Republican in the state of Georgia. The candidates, we were asked to discuss where we stand on the hot topic items of healthcare, climate change, and criminal justice reform or prison reform. So I'll begin with criminal justice reform, as I like to call it, criminal and racial injustice. This is an area that is near and dear to my heart as an African American because the Black and brown communities throughout Georgia and these United States of America are 10 times more susceptible to incarceration than any other ethnicities just because of the color of our skin. Black men, especially young Black men like myself, are more likely to be stopped, searched, charged with a crime, and given a more harsh sentence than a white man guilty of the same crime. That's a fact. Before we can reform, which means to change, we must acknowledge that the implicit biases are very present in the 21st century. Over-criminalization, over-incarceration primarily affects low-income and Black and brown communities so much that these communities feel targeted by law enforcement officials. These communities have a lack of trust in the police department, and rightfully so, because police brutality is on the rise. Our country is equivalent to roughly 4.25% of the total world population. Yet, we account for almost 25% of the total prison population. The majorities of inmates behind jail and prison walls today are non-violent offenders, with African Americans and Hispanics making up over 58% of those incarcerated. So we know that there's a significant need for reform in our criminal justice and prison system. And I believe that it begins with strengthening the trust between police departments and those communities affected and systematically targeted, as well as ending racial profiling. Furthermore, I believe and support ending mass incarceration. And we do that by eliminating prison as an option for lower level crimes like petty theft and marijuana. I also believe that we need to review and reduce sentence minimums and maximums for lower level crimes such as robbery. At the end of the day, we need to be committed to improving the conditions and lives of those who are incarcerated, and this includes ending solitary confinement. Now, with respect to climate change, this is an area, ladies and gentlemen, that we simply can no longer continue to ignore. We can no longer ignore that our country, our planet, is being hurt by climate change. As the greatest country on this planet, the world expects the U.S. to be a leader on climate change. But David Perdue, that White House occupant, and most Republicans would have you and I to believe that there is no such thing as climate change. It's all a hoax made up by the Democrats just to get your vote. Shameful.
Amen.
But the truth is that Democrats and people all over the world know that climate change is real and it is affecting our planet each and every day that we fail to take action. So how do we know that climate change is real? We know it by the rise in temperatures. We know it by the oceans warming daily. Ice sheets and ice caps are melting. The sea levels are rising. Extreme weather events are all signs from our planet telling us in advance to fix what we as humans have done. And we've got to fix it before it's too late. Now, the real question is, what can we do to combat climate change? That's got to be the real question. And the first thing that I believe that we need to do is to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. It is so very important that we surround ourselves with other countries who are committed to making the necessary changes to reduce the harmful effects of climate change. I also believe that we need to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We need to become less dependent on fossil fuels and become more dependent on renewable energies. We must absolutely cut off all subsidies and end all tax loopholes. We must reduce our oil consumption and require that automakers build more efficient vehicles. And lastly, I think that we need to invest in and reward businesses and corporations who are building energy efficient products that are safe for our environment, safe for our communities, safe for our children and our families, our friends, our neighbors. The only way to save our planet from continuing to rise in temperatures that no human being can live in is to start fixing the problem we created right now. Not tomorrow. Not next year. We no longer have that luxury of time being on our side. The work to ensure we heal our planet and save human life begins now. Lastly, healthcare. I do not believe that healthcare should be a choice. I believe it is a right.
Amen.
I believe that it is a human right. I also believe that immigrants living here, working here, should be afforded those same basic human rights. Immigrants should be afforded those same, they are still humans. And granted, all of us are immigrants. I do not believe that a person should have to choose between paying their monthly premium versus paying their Georgia Power bill. That should be a no question. You have to have health care, you have to have power. Let's face it. We have to have electricity to function during the day. We have to have electricity to function at night. And if you're anything like me, who loves to cook and bake, we have to have electricity to cook. We have to have electricity to cool down or heat up our homes. But equally so, we need healthcare insurance to maintain a healthy lifestyle for ourselves, for our children, for our families. And we also need health insurance to improve our quality of life. Did you know that right now, there are 27.5 million people living in the United States who do not have insurance? 27.5 million do not have insurance. And 45% of them remain uninsured simply because of the cost of healthcare. It's for this reason that I do support a Medicare for All system. We have multiple payers in our current system like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Humana, and Cigna. And prior to the passage of the ACA in 2010, not one of those major payers fought for you. Did you hear me? Not one of those major payers fought to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Not one of those payers fought to ensure people with pre-existing conditions could get coverage. Not one of those payers fought to bring down the cost of premiums.
2 minutes, Mark.
Thank you. I want to preach. The reason that they didn't fight for you and I is because it didn't benefit them. That's a simple answer. Medicare for All benefits you and I and not the healthcare system. I firmly believe that if we can get to a Medicare for All payer system, we will resolve most, if not all, of our current healthcare issues that we face today. Now, should that be the case, I do know that we will need to reevaluate the current reimbursement rates for doctors and hospitals to make it more attractive and lucrative for all parties involved. You see, the key here is to keep the physicians and hospitals who currently accept Medicare and to bring in those physicians and hospitals and healthcare facilities who currently do not accept Medicare due to the low reimbursement rates. And while we're on the subject of talking politics and healthcare, and with this being the week of the 47th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, I feel compelled to make sure that each one of you know how gravely important it is to defeat David Perdue in November. David Perdue is an enemy to healthcare. David Perdue is an enemy to reproductive rights. David Perdue is an enemy to women's rights. David Perdue is an enemy to democracy. He's an enemy to common sense gun legislation. As a matter of fact, he is an enemy to common sense. No man, no government, be it local, state, or federal, should be endowed with the power to dictate what a woman can and cannot do with her body. The moment that we allow the government to have that much say in what we do or do not do with our bodies, we have just forfeited our rights and have become property of the government. And lastly, if we allow David Perdue and the Republican Party to take away a woman's rights today, what would keep them from taking away or overreaching our other rights tomorrow? Thank you so very much for your time. My name is Mark Peace, United States Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much. I am a little stickler for time. Just let you know. Let's see. Next is Sarah. How you feeling? Ready? Okay, wonderful. Would you prefer a podium or a clip-on mic? Okay, great. All right, so you all may remember Sarah Briggs Amico as our 2018 Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor. Such an exciting process. Wish it had ended differently, but we're working on that. Sarah attended Washington and Lee University and then earned her MBA from Harvard Business School. She and her husband, Andrea, have 2 daughters, Ava and Sophia. Who is with you today?
Sophia.
Sophia, and is it Sophia's birthday?
Last week. Today it's her sister's.
Oh, okay. Oh, so do you get separate parties or double parties?
First
We all-
year for separate parties.
Okay, yeah, well, there you go. Very wonderful. Happy belated birthday, hon. And so with no further ado, let me introduce Sarah Briggs Amico.
First of all, thank you so much. Good morning. How are y'all? Good. I'm short, so we're going to move this slide down a little bit so you can see me. Yeah, thank you. Sorry to be a little bit tardy. We are in the 8 days that encompass both of my daughter's birthday this week. So welcome to the life of a working mom. When one of them asks that you turn around and come back and bring her to your breakfast, even if you're already on the highway, you do. So here we are in time, but Sophia was really excited to be here. In fact, one of the things that you asked us to talk about, one of the top 3 issues for Muscogee County Democrats was healthcare. And this is very much the issue that animated me, that made me decide to run for office. I am the very proud daughter of a former NICU nurse. My mother went into that field in part because in the 1950s, her mother almost died when access to abortion care was not legal. And she had twins in utero who died, I think, regarding a gallstone, if I'm not mistaken. And because she was not able to do what is now called the DNC, she was forced to carry around twin fetuses that were deceased. And the idea was that you would deliver naturally. And unfortunately, in her case, that didn't happen for several weeks. So we're quite lucky that she didn't go septic and die. And my mother and her sister, older sister Bev, as a result, went into nursing. And in fact, my aunt just retired, I think, last year after 35 years. But part of the reason that we got into politics in the first place, and I say we because make no mistake, this is a family engagement. I went through about 150 counties in 2018 as your nominee for Lieutenant Governor in less than 10 months. And the vast majority of those, Sophia, her sister, and her dad, we all went through together. But one of the things that really, one of the things I remember most about it are the stories that I heard on the trail. And in fact, it wasn't too far from here, Stewart-Webster County. I stopped to do a video of one of the rural hospitals, Stewart-Webster Hospital, right between the 2 counties that had closed when Georgia failed to expand Medicaid. And if you've seen it, it was an old 25-bed hospital, part of the community. We later met people who had had their children there or said goodbye to their loved ones in that hospital. And if you look at it today, it looks sort of like the set of Grey Gardens, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. For everyone else, think American Horror Story Rural Hospital Edition. There are buildings and bricks crumbling. There are vines overgrowing. There are hornets' nests hanging. And we sat and we did a video about this hospital and what it looks like when 480,000 Georgians could have health insurance if only the GOP leadership in the state had taken their responsibility to our people seriously enough to expand Medicaid. And so for us, we do this video, we're talking about healthcare, and we leave to go down to Shellman, Georgia. And as we're driving down the road with the 2 kids in the back of the car, there is an accident about 5 minutes down the road. Car upside down in a ditch, police, fire, ambulance all around. And my husband turns to me and he says, whoever is upside down in that ditch now has to go to Columbus instead of 5 minutes down the road where we were just standing. And I have to tell you, when you're driving down the road with your kids in the car thinking, if I had been 15 minutes earlier, would that be us upside down in the ditch? It hits you pretty hard. And when we got to Shellman, I told this story to the group of voters. We were meeting at a little lunch place. It's not a big town. And the woman sitting next to me was very quiet. And I thought, oh, she must not like the story, or I must have said something that offended. And in fact, what happened was, when I finished telling the story, she said this: "It's actually worse than that." And I thought, well, how does it get worse than losing your access to care and your hospital? And she says, well, we lost our ambulance service. And when my mom got sick, it took 25 minutes to find an ambulance for her to get to that Columbus hospital, which I think is about 65 miles away from Shellman. Her mother, unfortunately, was pronounced deceased pulling into the ambulance bay here in Columbus. So when we talk about healthcare, I want you to know this isn't academic, it's not theoretical, it's not something that I think we can talk about for a few years until we get to the right place. I want you to know that right in your own backyard, this is a matter of life and death. This is a matter that is a solvable problem that we simply have not solved in Georgia or in this country because of the failures of Republican leadership. Tell you that for me, as a U.S. Senator, healthcare will be one of my top 3 priorities, along with voting rights, election securities, and economic security for your family. This is the issue of our lifetime. It is a human right, and we should accept whatever system gets us to where no one in this country is sick because they are poor, or poor simply because they got sick. That is the standard. I am certainly open to a public option that introduces competition. I am open to moving to a public expanded safety net. I will tell you, one of the reasons I'm not there yet on getting rid of private insurance is I ran, as many of you know, for about 10 years, a Teamster company. Had about 2,200 Teamsters and machinists working for me. And there are many people, including our labor brothers and sisters, who like the insurance programs that they have. In fact, I'm on Teamster Healthcare, as it turns out. I have Team Care. And I'm not ready yet to tell those folks who designed those programs to meet their needs that they have to get rid of their insurance. I'm also not ready to tell the hundreds of thousands of people who work for those companies that they'll be out of a job instantly. So the goal we share is the same. I respect Mark Keith immensely, as I do all of my primary opponents. But we have got to work together from that value statement that nobody should be sick because they're poor or poor because they're sick. And whatever gets everybody covered, you have my commitment. That is what I will fight for you in the U.S. Senate. You had also asked us to cover climate change. Look, guys, you're in one of these areas that's on the front lines of climate change, whether or not you see it every day. From the quality of our soils to the way that weather patterns are impacting harvesting and planting and yield. Farmers are on the front lines of our climate change crisis. And make no mistake, it is not a hoax made up by, I think Donald Trump said, the Chinese, if I'm not mistaken. Bless him. We need to put science and data and research back at the forefront of our environmental policies. Absolutely. We've got this week, the president rolled back most of the clean water protections that the Obama era rules put in place. That protected 60% of our nation's waterways. And yeah, and the thing is they're getting rid of it at the upstream end of the water system, right? And their argument is that this is a win for home developers, it's a win somehow for farmers, but let me tell you, any of you who watch the news and the crisis in Flint, Michigan, know this isn't a win for anybody. You cannot keep the downstream water sources in this country clean if you're allowing pollution and dumping upstream in the tributaries. 80% of our drinking water in this country comes from those surface level bodies of water. And your president this week, under the guise of who knows what, again, bless him, has literally rolled back the protections that'll make sure my daughters have clean air and clean water in this nation when they're my age. It's immoral, unethical, and we need to do everything we can to strengthen the environmental policies, to, yes, rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, but most importantly, to protect the only planet it is that we have to live on together. So, And last but not least, you had asked us to talk about criminal justice reform. Guys, this is again personal for me. I can't help it, by the way. I grew up in the Ozarks. It's a Midwestern thing. We tell stories for everything. But this is a very simple one here in Georgia. You know, since 1982, the prison population in Georgia has grown 400%. Okay, you did not mishear that. African Americans make up more than 60% of the prison population, despite the fact that the 2010 census had them at only 30% of the general population. We have a justice and equity problem in our criminal justice system. The ACLU tells us that 1 in 17 white boys will be incarcerated in his lifetime. And for young black boys, that number is 1 in 3. It is a sobering statistic, but let me tell you this, it is also the direct result of a legacy for 400 years that this country has not appropriately addressed its original sins of the enslavement of African people brought here against their will and the stealing of the land from native peoples in this country. Those are the things on which this country is. If you want equity, you've got to dig in there and root it out, guys. In our prison system, you could remove the profit incentive. Those of you who know me know that I'm relatively new to politics, but I've been a business executive for 17 years. When you privatize a prison system, when you make it a business, it has 2 primary incentives: to grow the top line and grow the bottom line. That means to grow the prison population and diminish the services. If you want criminal justice reform, mark my words, take away the profit incentive. That means no private prison, no capitalism, and no prison anywhere in the country. You know, we've got an opportunity here in Georgia. Some of our criminal justice reforms under Governor Deal actually were a model for the First Step Act in the federal government. Unfortunately, the First Step Act was just that. It was a first step. We need to continue to work, and even here in Georgia, those reforms are under threat, guys. Governor Kemp is proposing to take $3 million out of the budget of public defenders and put it into the public prosecutors' pockets. He is cutting the accountability courts that we know are working. We are one of a handful of states in this country where juveniles are put into the adult prison system. We are what they call a gladiator state. We need to address all of these reforms, and we need to save those cuts that Kemp is quietly lining up in the background to roll back the progress we've made. And last but not least, you had asked us, what have we changed our mind on? And we talked a little bit about water in terms of environmentalism, but I will tell you that coming from a transportation and trucking background, that's my professional background. I ran a trucking company for years. I used to think we needed omnibus infrastructure investment. But here's the thing, we do. But it's highly unlikely to get done at the federal level. And what I've learned and where I've evolved, to answer your question, what have we changed your mind on? I think we need to eat the elephant, so to speak, one bite at a time. We need to start with water infrastructure in this country. We have 240,000 water main breaks annually in America, more than 2 trillion gallons of water annually wasted simply by cracks and leaks in our existing water infrastructure. Most of the water infrastructure in this country was put in place in the early to mid 20th century with a useful life of 75 to 100 years. Those of you who are good at math, it's starting to click, right? This stuff is wearing out. And the thing about capital investments and capital expenditures is you actually have to replace it, it wears out. So the thing that I've evolved on most on infrastructure is, yes, we need to fix bridges, roads, tunnels, smart grids, power walls, microgrids. We have a lot of work to do. But the thing that we should be able to agree on, no matter what your political partisan preference is water. What happened in Flint, Michigan is a national embarrassment. There are still thousands of kids without access to clean water, and we can fix that by re-engineering our water infrastructure. Last but not least, you had asked on your music. This is hard for somebody like me. I love music. I was the only non-music major in my college who was allowed to have a senior recital because I spent that much time in the music department. So from Mozart to Metallica, Bob Marley to Bob Dylan, Dolly Parton to Dottie Peoples, it's all in my phone. So picking this is like picking a favorite child, no offense, Sophia, or picking a favorite ice cream. But what I will say is the music that's speaking to me right now, other than Frozen 2, which my kids play on repeat, is probably Bob Dylan. And thinking about how the soundtrack of a generation can really spur us to think about social justice and social change and the collective power we have when we move forward together in a common purpose. And so if I'm your senator, that's my commitment, that I will come back, I will talk to you often, I will use 2 ears and 1 mouth in the correct proportions and hear your thoughts and your feedback, and that we will write a soundtrack together about what social justice looks like in our lifetime and in my children's lifetime. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Next up, we have John Ossoff. John is a Georgia native, a media executive, and an investigative journalist. He's a graduate of Georgetown University and the London School of Economics. He previously worked as a national security aide for Georgia Congressman Hank Johnson. In 2017, you probably will all remember John as the Democratic nominee for the special election in Georgia's 6th district. That was kind of one of those things that spurred us all to action. Everyone had their eyes on that race, and so many people got involved in politics at the grassroots level in that election. It was impressive. So let me welcome John Ossoff.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
In the back, too?
Yes.
Good. Let me just take a moment to thank our hosts from the Muscogee County Democrats. Thank you so much for having us here. Forgive that mispronunciation. It is great to be back in Columbus. I want to also take a moment to thank the staff who have served us here this morning for taking care of us, serving us food. We're grateful for this food, grateful for this fellowship and this company. I've already made some new friends this morning, and I'm looking forward to working with you over these next 10 months to win not 1, but 2 U.S. Senate seats. There is a deep corruption afflicting this country right now. It is a deep corruption. And it doesn't start and end with Donald Trump. Arguably, Donald Trump's election is a symptom of this corruption. That a man with this character has ascended to the highest office in the land has and should continue to ring alarm bells for all of us that something is deeply amiss in America today. And let's just look at the last 20 years of our national history. We have squandered trillions of dollars and thousands of lives and tens of thousands of wounded bodies on needless war. We have squandered trillions of dollars on tax cuts for the most powerful and well-connected people in our society. We have squandered trillions of dollars bailing out the most powerful investment banks in the world. But then Donald Trump and David Perdue, they tell us there's no money for Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. There's no money for nutrition programs or food stamps or clean energy or infrastructure. No wonder people have lost faith in our political system. No wonder a right-wing demagogue has assumed the powers of the presidency. It's a deep corruption. Y'all are familiar with the 6th district special election that you mentioned. You may not know about the rest of my story, what I do for a living. I fight corruption for a living. In 2013, I was asked to take over as CEO of a then 21-year-old multi-Emmy award-winning media production company. We produce undercover investigations of official corruption and corporate wrongdoing. We produce investigations of war crimes and human rights abuses all over the world. That is the work I am passionate about doing. because the abuse of power is a grave sin that must be exposed and punished. I had worked previously in politics and government. I worked for Georgia Congressman Hank Johnson. I'm proud to have his support. I had worked in the office of Congressman John Lewis, and I'm proud to have his support as well in this race. But after 5 years working in Washington, I had seen the corruption and hypocrisy and dysfunction and had just about enough, got out of town and went into journalism, which is a pure endeavor. And I had no plans to get back into politics until Donald Trump was elected president. That changed my world. And I think it changed yours. And it should have. And so in 2017, 6 weeks after then Congressman Tom Price had been reelected in Georgia's 6th district by 24%, when no one thought that district could be competitive, let alone won, I was 29 years old, no one had heard my name, I ran for Congress anyway. And then so many of you and literally hundreds of thousands of people across the country got behind me, and that became the biggest congressional race in American history. And they had to send down the president and the vice president and the speaker of the House and spend tens of millions of dollars to defend something they believed was theirs by right. And they did beat me, but not by much. And we swung that district by 20 points in 6 months. And that was hard work by tens and hundreds of thousands of supporters. We ran the largest field program ever in a U.S. House race. We knocked on more doors than had ever been knocked on in a U.S. House campaign. And we drove the strongest turnout literally in American history in a standalone special election for the U.S. House of Representatives. So I hope you know that I look back on that race and I hold my head high. And I'm proud of the infrastructure and the foundations that we built, because a fight well fought, even when you lose, can be worth what you build in the process. And we now have momentum. We now have the winds at our back in Georgia. The tremendous effort over these last 3 years, the voter registration, the organization. And what a privilege to have 2 U.S. Senate races in a single state, the only state in the country where that's the case. Why must we win these races? It's not because blue is a better color than red. It's not because this is a team sport. We need to stop treating it like a sport. This is deadly serious. This matters because elections have consequences for human beings. Here in Georgia, where we have, depending upon how you count it, either the worst or the second worst maternal mortality rate in the United States. Higher than in Uzbekistan. And you're right, Sarah, it is not just a statistic. That means women are bleeding to death, needlessly, and suffering. Because the cowards who run our state government are so consumed by their partisan resentment and their contempt for the poor that they refuse to expand Medicaid, that they refuse to address this crisis of closures of hospitals and clinics in our rural areas, where 1 in 3 children lives in poverty. Who's talking about poverty? The president brags about the S&P 500 on Twitter. 1 in 3 children in rural Georgia living in poverty don't own stock. What are our leaders doing for them? What has David Perdue done for children living in poverty or women dying in childbirth? Nothing. David Perdue has done nothing. In 5 years as our senator, not one public town hall. If you wanted to bend your senator's ear, you could have lunch with him a couple months ago. You know how much it would have cost you? $100,000. $100,000 to sit down with your senator. That is corruption. See, my business, we produce undercover investigations. A lot of the time, you've got to go in undercover to document corruption. Here in America, it's in plain sight. It's in plain sight. Look at his voting record. Look where he takes his money. The fossil fuel industry. We have a senator who believes fossil fuel industry lobbyists are a more reliable source for information about what's happening to our environment than NASA and the military and the intelligence community and the overwhelming consensus of peer-reviewed scientists. As your U.S. Senator, I will listen to scientists, not lobbyists. I will push for the U.S. to rejoin the Paris Accord. We will take leadership on climate change. And it's not just the climate. We are living out of balance with our planet. We cannot sustain it. It is snowing plastic in the Arctic. There's plastic in all of our bodies in this room right now. In fact, we can't even measure the effects of plastic contamination on our body because there's no control group. That means we can't find anyone who doesn't have plastic in their bodies anymore. We got to get serious about changing our ways so we do not destroy this one earth that we live on. And we have to get serious about where our government and our system is doing so many people so wrong in our prisons, in our jails. In our jails where people languish for months or over a year before they even face a crime. Punished before conviction. In our prisons where crime is rampant, drug abuse is rampant, abuse of prisoners is rampant. At every step in our criminal justice system, from policing to prosecution, to sentencing and incarceration, Black and brown Americans continue to bear the brunt of a discriminatory system that was designed to be discriminatory. We need bold criminal justice reform in this country. We were talking, you mentioned decriminalization of cannabis as a possible subject. I'm for legalization, regulation, and taxation of cannabis, because if you can drink and consume cigarettes, which are far more harmful, what someone does in the privacy of their own home is none of my business as a politician. So look, we have a mighty task over these next 10 months. Future generations are watching us, will be watching us. I just got married about a year and a half ago. My wife is an OBGYN doctor. She works mostly at Grady Hospital in Atlanta. We were talking about how our grandchildren are going to be asking us what we did at this moment in American history. When I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that the republic itself hangs in the balance. I am ready to work tirelessly with you to make history in Georgia, to deliver 2 Senate victories, 16 electoral college votes, remove Donald Trump from the White House, elect some decent, effective, sensible representation for this state, keep moving America forward, and build the kind of world that we can be proud of. So I thank you all for being here.
Since you forgot, I'm going to give you this microphone and you have to sing.
After the primary.
Okay.
Yeah, Vivian Bishop reminded me the question was about music. So did y'all hear that Whitney Houston Higher Love remix?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is your treat for the weekend, right? They found Whitney's voice with her permission, her estate's permission, on Higher Love, and they got a producer to put something together that's new and uplifting and inspiring. So when you're feeling kind of down because the news ain't too good these days, Higher Love, Whitney Houston. There you go.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, so we have Maya Dillard-Smith and then Teresa Tomlinson, and then we're going to wrap it up after that. Let me introduce Maya Dillard-Smith, who has an acute case of laryngitis. So she gets the special mic, but I want you to know that in advance. Maya studied economics at UC Berkeley. She earned her master's. Maya is an expert on the U.S. Constitution, so you must be just going crazy now. An authority at the intersection of law, policy, and economics. For nearly a decade, Maya served as the statewide constitutional officer. In this capacity, she provided oversight of judges and judicial nominees. And Maya is also the parent of, or the mother of 3 daughters. So please welcome.
I'm gonna try this out. Can you all hear me? This is horrible, but I am here and I am so excited to introduce myself to you, Muscogee County Democrats. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I apologize for this voice, but as a mother, when your child coughs in your face and you get the cooties the day before you're supposed to speak to an audience, you show up. And I am here, and I thank you all very much for having me on this morning. I think it's a great opportunity to launch right into a discussion on the issues. I will not grandstand and give you a rancorous speech, a stump speech. I want to talk to you directly about the issues. As you hear this voice, I am privileged that I have health care. I am privileged because in this country, it is not a right, but it should be. It should be a basic right, as should shelter, as should a honest pay for honest work, period. We have so much work to do in this country. We've talked, you've heard a lot from the candidates about the disparities that exist, but none of them have the crippling effect like medical expense. It is the #1 cause of bankruptcy in America. And the failure of predominantly Republican states to pass Medicare expansion is leading to astronomical rural hospital closures. You've heard folks talk about the impact that it has on individuals. I know it firsthand. Driving down a country road, my brother, who has respiratory issues, was overcome. We had to call ambulance services. We were rushed to a community hospital. We had medical insurance, but it was out of network. And we waited for 13 hours while he struggled to breathe and feared for his life. And these are realities that we hear day in and day out on the campaign trail. But what are we going to do about it? There are many options on the table around what I hope to see is universal health care. I'm not interested in the catchy phrases of Medicare for all. What does it mean? What does it mean for prescription drug costs, which we have to bring in line? What does it mean for this opioid crisis that is obliterating a generation of folks, which we as Black people know well with the crack cocaine epidemic? And while we were not treated with compassion, rehabilitation was not the norm. And in fact, if we're honest, it was Democrats who handed to us the 1994 crime bill that put away generations of Black and brown men, and it took away the franchise. And we have to fix that. And so as much as I listen to pointing to the other side, when are we going to look at ourselves and say what we need to do different to model to this country what ought to be done by anybody, regardless of their partisanship? We must do that. Medicare is a system that provides prescription coverage and preventative care for elders and seniors. How many in this room have actually used Medicare before? Perfect. How many in this room have used Medicaid? So the difference in the programs, in my experience, is that Medicaid provides coverages for children, reproductive health care for mothers and women. And unless we are talking about the benefits that will be given under any proposal of universal health care, I'm not going to tell you that I'm for Medicare for all if it does not also provide the coverages that exist in Medicaid today and expand them to everyone. In the same way, single payer health care is important. We should have a basic standard of preventative care for everyone. But this notion that if you earn more money, you get a better set of services is outrageous to me. It is outrageous. This notion somehow that because you are entitled to private health care today, you should be entitled to it forever is somewhat precarious to me. We as taxpayers are already paying for the uninsured when they show up in our ER at a cost 3 times the preventative care. So unless and until we talk about those issues, let's stop with the catchphrases. Let's talk about the issues and what we are going to do. As a mother of a child that is asthmatic, I want to talk to you about another young woman I know with asthma who's lying in a hospital bed right now, intubated. She had an asthma attack. They put a tube down her throat. It caused scar tissue. It blocked her airways. This is a millennial young woman. She went in for a repair surgery this week. They did a successful surgery. She coughed. It untangled the sutras in her throat. And so they had to put her under and sedate her to heal her. She is gathering liquid and fluid on her lungs. And as her family prays for her, as they work with medical teams to ensure her care, it makes me wonder about our environment. My daughter's asthma is not activity induced. It is caused by the toxins in our air. She can't breathe. Our children cannot breathe. And so when we talk about these big things about climate change and we don't make them real for people, when they do not have adequate drinking water, when lead is killing our children, not just in Flint, right here in Georgia. The EPA has violations on the west side of Atlanta. They fixed the infrastructure to support the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but they did not fix it for the residents in Vine City and English Ave, who are predominantly African American. And when it rains, the streets floods with open sewage in 2020. And the cleanup was not done, and the EPA gave another 20-year extension. At what point are we going to enforce the rules we have on the book? I am all for rejoining the Paris Accord. I've worked with Ovi Muhaley, a former Falcon. He has one of the very few eco foundations. And I've partnered with Lonnie Johnson, the African-American inventor who invented the Super Soaker, who is at the forefront of STEAM education and robotics training to both train young people on sustainable living, recycling, not using single plastic bottles, which is crippling our water sources and accelerating our climate issues. We're tackling these things with practical lifestyle changes, which are equally important to the things that we're doing under the Paris Accord to attend to carbon gases and emissions. But we have to have a practical, pragmatic approach to dealing with these issues. It's imperative. On the issue of criminal justice reform, I have been at the forefront of violence prevention and criminal justice reform for the past 20 years. It is a feel-good thing to talk about the disparities. It is something different when your community, when your family, when the people that you love have been directly impacted. We have crippled a generation of Black and brown men and women in this country. We have taken away a sustainable workforce. We have taken away the franchise from millions of voters. As an example, here in Georgia, you can actually register to vote if you're in jail. How many of you know that? As the chair, as a member of the board of Rainbow Push Coalition, we are undertaking an effort to register men and women who are today incarcerated estimated at about 50,000 individuals who would have made the difference for Stacey Abrams being our governor today. But we have to have practical approaches to dealing with these issues. Let me talk about what that means at the federal level, because some of my opponents have talked about it at the state level, but that isn't the federal system. And as senators, we don't control the state systems. So I think it's important to talk in fact about the job we are all asking you to hire us for. This is a job interview. I'm interviewing, okay? We need to restore the opportunities for people who have served their time to come home and be reintegrated into our communities. That means we need to address the Pell Grant system, which takes away the right of folks who are formerly incarcerated to go to school. What kind of sense does that make, right? We need to address affordable housing and HUD rules, which took away the rights for people to go home where their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their loved ones are. We have to provide the rehabilitation services for them in the way that we're talking about for the opioid crisis. We absolutely have to do those things. And those are things that on day one, I'm prepared to do as your next senator. On day one, I want to implement an act called the Fair Share Act. And what the Fair Share Act aims to do is to tackle income inequality by ensuring there are fair wages for an honest day's work. That's about a minimum wage, and it's also about setting a cap on wages. I don't understand how corporations will lay off thousands of workers and in the same breath pay millions to the CEOs. How does that work? Enron did not pay their workers for their time in their pension obligations. We have to hold corporations accountable to paying their employees, not just for the time served, but to prepare them for retirement. Social Security in its current form is unsustainable. Privatization is not the answer. It is not the answer. And so I see an opportunity and a pathway for fair share. We also need to legalize cannabis, but we have to be mindful of the public health impact. I have represented for the last 15 years the first African-American dispensary owner in America. Cannabis is something I know intimately. But to deny that there are public health consequences about the consumption of a entity that does change your cognitive function is to not be honest about the impact of alcohol or tobacco. Do I agree that we should have a federal regulatory structure that taxes? Absolutely. But what we need to do is make it retroactive so the people who are in jail, who pioneered the industry, can actually have reparations to come back and take advantage of the economic opportunity in the largest cash crop in America. Absolutely. I have farm roots. My great-grandfather was born in Garfield, Georgia in 1895. He migrated to Boley, Oklahoma, just outside Tulsa, before settling in Bakersfield, California, the Central Valley. We still own and operate a 50-acre family farm. Knowing that we must create opportunities, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas for communities to thrive. It is important. That is for white farmers, that is for Black farmers, because so many folks have been locked out of the economic opportunity around cannabis who actually own land. And we've got to do a better job of equalizing the playing field. And so on day one, I am committed to taking my expertise as the only candidate I'm aware of that's worked in every branch of government, in every level of government. I've worked for a member of Congress who was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I worked for the federal courts, the Court of Appeals, and I worked for the U.S. Census Congressional Monitoring Board as a statistical advisor in 2000, 20 years ago. The census is so incredibly important for determining the boundaries for redistricting, and we need independent redistricting committees. I will cede my time I thank you all for hearing me on this morning, and I certainly look forward to earning your support over the next 4 months. Thank you very much.
Do I need to introduce Mr. Y'all know her as our former mayor. She had 2 terms. She attended Sweetbriar College in Virginia and then Emory Law School, then went back in 2015 to be in the leadership team that saved Sweetbriar College. And she moved to Columbus in 1994 from Atlanta and married her husband, Trip. Please welcome Teresa Tomlinson.
Amen.
Thank you, Lauren. It's really great to see you all this morning. Thank you to the Muscogee County Democrats for welcoming all of my colleagues here who are fighting to be the Democratic nominee to replace David Perdue. Thank you for what you do for better governing principles here in Muscogee County. Let me just get right to it, folks. Things are grave. This election couldn't be more important.
Amen.
I just turn on the news and see what's going on, and you understand why it is critically important that we replace David Perdue, who is our current president's biggest enabler. And we have inherited a tremendous legacy and an opportunity to get this done. In 2016, Donald Trump won the state of Georgia with 50.4% of the vote. The man barely won a majority in the state of Georgia. In 2018, Stacey Abrams came within 55,000 votes. Amidst a sea of voter suppression, she came within 55,000 votes of becoming the first African-American woman to be elected governor in the United States of America. That almost happened in Georgia. So make no mistake about it, we stand on the precipice of taking this legacy that has been given to us and finally crossing the finish line after 18 years of Republican domination. We know that David Perdue is vulnerable. The University of Georgia has just conducted a poll that said if the election was held today, 35% of the registered voters would vote for David Perdue, but 61% of the registered voters in the state of Georgia would consider voting for the Democratic nominee, depending on who that Democratic nominee is. Depending on who that Democratic nominee is. So your job here, your choice here, is so incredibly important. We must field a nominee who can beat David Perdue. And folks, that means that we must field a nominee that has actually won hard-fought elections. And you know I won the first election with 68% of the vote. The next was 63% of the vote. We need to field a candidate who has governed and governed well, who has held a hand on the wheel of government and knows that it serves the people who put us in that office. Somebody who can stand toe-to-toe with David Perdue and say, I know what good government looks like. I have delivered it for the people I served and serve. You have failed us.
Amen.
We need to deliver a candidate who has a body of work, lifelong experience in solving difficult problems. I worked in the federal litigation system and appellate courts all over this country. I'm admitted to the United States Supreme Court, and I've had cases go to the United States Supreme Court. I worked in trial courts all over this country, including here in the state of Georgia, to make the legal system work for people, to apply federal legislation towards justice, and to make sure there was fairness. I have fought some of the largest and most corrupt corporations and brought them to their knees in that federal court system. And yes, in addition to the public service here, I was so honored to have the opportunity to do. I had a hand in leading and revitalizing Midtown Columbus, which a lot of people thought was lost. And look at it today. So I had the great pleasure of saving my college alma mater by raising $28.5 million in 110 days, reforming that college, and today it thrives. So I know how to lead. I know how to solve dysfunctional systems. And the last time I looked, we were in desperate need of that in the United States Senate. So let me tell you how we're going to win this thing. We're going to run a candidate who has lived and loved Atlanta and is a proud Democrat who still has those constituencies and can carry that major Democratic stronghold and carry it strongly. We're going to run a candidate who is familiar with Central Georgia, which is where Muscogee County is, and they know what has gone on in Columbus, Georgia. They know the mayor, and we're going to go get our Democratic voters in those 50 counties. And you may know that I'm 8th generation Georgian, 7 generations of rural rank poverty. I come from a long line of sharecroppers and rural day laborers. And I'm going to go to South Georgia, where I am familiar with how government touches their lives, and we are going to shave David Perdue's margins that he desperately needs to win this election. That's how we're going to beat David Perdue. And so in order to get to the important issues that you're concerned about, let me talk about prison reform. Because you can talk about all kinds of things and you can pontificate, but there's only one candidate in this race that has actually implemented comprehensive prison reform. You all may remember that one of my first acts in office was that I took over the Muscogee County Prison. I fired the leadership and forced the resignation of others. We had a live trial before city council, and some of them tried to defy those firings. And our city council unanimously supported my decision. I replaced that leadership. We changed it from a work camp system to a job training and rehabilitation system. We implemented an aggressive GED program that became the largest graduate of GED participants in the state of Georgia. We instituted soft skills training. Hundreds of prisoners a year went through that soft skills training. We partnered with our crime prevention office and Columbus Technical College to provide certificates of completion for prisoners who had tutelage under licensed plumbers and electricians and carpenters so that they could be employed when they got out. And then I banned the box as mayor. We hired our own prisoners to do the jobs they had been doing while they were serving their time and gave them good salaries and gave them benefits. So that's prison. You sent somebody who's actually already done it, and we are going to ban private prisons. We're going to ban private prisons. We are going to take the first step back, the second step back, and we're not going to stop until we have ended mass incarceration in this country. Those are the things we can do if we send somebody who, as Max Cleland said when he endorsed me last fall, is ready to serve on day one. That's the candidate that we need to provide. And so let me talk to you about healthcare. This is what we can do. We can put Medicare on the exchange and make private insurance companies compete with that efficient system. We can forget allowing these states to blackball their own folks in need of Medicaid by going ahead and letting the federal government take over Medicaid. We're paying for 90 cents on the dollar anyway. Let's go ahead and pay for the whole 100 cents on the dollar and make sure that people that live up to 138% of the poverty level get Medicaid without any state being able to veto it because of political gamesmanship. And let's finally start looking what has been discussed in this country for 25 years of expanding Medicare to 55. We know how much it would cost us. We know who would be served by it. We know the money we would save, and we know that the administrative apparatus we already have largely can take care of expanding it to 55. Stop talking about it. Let's start doing it. And when it comes to environmental policy, that's another thing. We all love to sign petitions and we love to march in the street. I've had the great privilege of actually instituting and implementing environmental policies. You all know that fuel storage system that was down on the banks of the Chattahoochee that threatened the water quality for all of the communities south of us. The Port Authority owned that land, and they had a lucrative lease with a fuel company. And it was because of our great city manager, our city attorney, and me as mayor that was able, because of my experience in complex litigation, negotiating tough resolutions, we were able to come up with a strategic plan that actually returned that land to the city and we removed that fuel storage tank system, turpentine, sulfate, and all sorts of dangerous chemicals. That's someone who believes in the environment. We supplied 66 miles of an alternative transportation system here in Columbus, Georgia, so you don't have to own a car to live in Columbus, Georgia, depending on where you live. You take that kind of can-do leadership to the United States Senate, and I am telling you something. We will invest what we need to invest to create millions of jobs by creating a new clean energy power grid. We will incentivize those who are working in carbon capture and include our own farmers and our timber industry because they can be an integral part of carbon capture too. If we invest in this new infrastructure, we will take advantage of a whole new world, and the United States cannot fall behind. We've been talking about climate change, folks, since 1896, when the first scholarly article came out connecting the production of carbon and global temperatures. We've wasted enough time, so no, I'm not afraid of the Green New Deal. And if there's something in it we need to adjust so it doesn't have an unforeseen impact, fine, we will do that. That's what we can do if we elect the right nominee who can actually beat David Perdue. That's the opportunity of this great country. And let me close with the two things that last questions that everybody's been able to get to. And let me tell you, when I was a teenager, I didn't think I needed the Equal Rights Amendment. Because, you see, I had read the Declaration of Independence and it said all men are created equal, and I thought they were talking about me too, being mankind. As I got a little bit older, it turns out, in fact, that there's systemic gender and racial biases running through all of our civic and economic infrastructure in this country. To our healthcare system, our housing system, our legislative system. People, because of the color of their skin and their gender, are not treated equal in this country. And so, yes, we need to amend the Voting Rights Act. And yes, we need to put into place the Equal Rights Amendment. And yes, we need the Equality Act so that no one, LGBT of our brothers and sisters, no transgender person should be shamed for the bathroom that they choose to go in because of their identity. We can do better, folks. And so I have changed my position from a 17-year-old kid that didn't know to a 54-year-old woman who damn well knows. Everybody in this room knows I can't sing. But everybody in this room knows I got moves. I got moves. So you put on some R&B music, and I don't care if it's the oldies of Marvin Gaye and Shaka Khan with her little bit of funk going on, or if you bring it all the way today with Khalid and her, I can't stay in my seat. And so I will tell you this. You choose the right Democratic nominee who can beat David Perdue, and on November 6th, I will see you on the dance floor as we have the biggest victory party this state has ever seen.
Okay, y'all, if you would just give me 5 more minutes, please. I want to show you something. For those of you who have done any kind of campaigning, you know that telling your personal story is the way to connect. And so I'm practicing here because I'm going to be getting ready for all the door knocking I'm going to be doing and all the phone calling I'm going to be doing. I'm going to tell you why it's so personal to me that we get Perdue out of here. I used to be an optimist. I used to really have faith in people and the goodness